Is this the worst financial crash that we've seen in our lifetimes? And where can we go from here? Joining me today is a very special guest, legendary investor Jim Rogers, co-founder of the Quantum Fund. Jim, it's such an honor to finally have the chance to speak with you. You're joining us all the way from Singapore. Welcome back to Kitco.
David, it is my honor, my pleasure. I am a fan of Kitco.
And we are a fan of you, Jim. Many people around the world are a fan of you. Jim, I wanna share this quote that I found with you. In 1930, GDP fell by 8.5%. We call that a depression. In 2009, real GDP contracted by 2.5%. We call that a recession. This year, annualized GDP contracted by 33%. What would you call that?
I wouldn't call it good. I would call it a disaster. I would call it the worst economic times in my lifetime.
And you've been on the show for many times, and you've been talking about the coming crash that is the worst in your lifetime. Is this it, Jim? Is this the worst that you've been predicting?
Well, this certainly has been the worst in my lifetime. We've had a huge rally because governments everywhere have printed and spent staggering amounts of money. But David, it just means the next time it's going to be worse still. You know, unless you think we'll never have economic problems and market problems again, the next one's going to be worse because the debt. David, in 2008, we had a problem because of debt. Since then, the debt has skyrocketed everywhere in the world. So unless you think we're not ever going to have problems again, then the next one's going to be worse, unless you know something I don't know.
How can we possibly see a worse situation from what we're seeing today? Record levels of unemployment, record levels of economic contraction, basically a comatose environment for the macro landscape all over the world. How could things possibly get worse, Jim?
Well, David, I suggest you read a little history and you will find it can get worse. People say it can get worse. Throughout history, go back into the 19th century. We just use America alone. We've had some staggering economic difficulties at times, but Europe too. Some of the largest banks in the world went bankrupt in previous economic hard times. Some companies that people never thought could go bankrupt collapsed. Don't think it cannot happen. It has happened, and it will happen again.
The equities market certainly seem to have shrugged this off if you just look at it without any context. We've seen new all-time highs in the NASDAQ. The S&P 500 has more or less returned to pre-COVID levels. Why are we so disconnected from reality in the stock markets, Jim?
David, 6 months ago, the United States, I'll use the US again, was the largest debtor nation in the history of the world. Never had anybody been so deep in debt. David, since then, the U.S. has increased its debt by trillions, with a T, trillions more. If you give me a few $1 trillion, I will show you a very, very good time. We will all have a wonderful time with a few $1 trillion. But David, somebody eventually has to pay the price because somebody has to worry about paying it back. David, it is these days are not good for old people. They are not at all good for young people. Even you, you're not old, you're not too young. I have young children. Oh my gosh, America's leaving them a terrible legacy, which they're going to struggle with all their lives. But right now, there's an election in November. Everybody wants to be reelected. So they're doing everything they can to be reelected, but it is leaving a very, very bad aftertaste.
There's a theory, Jim, that the Federal Reserve can pay off these debts like you talked about by printing more money. And so the circle continues. What do you think about that? Can they do that?
That's probably what will wind up happening. It has often happened in history. At the moment, first of all, whenever there's a problem in the world, people look around for an easy way to solve the problem. Once upon a time, there was a guy named Marx, Mr. Marx. Mr. Marx had a wonderful theory, and many people accepted it and tried it for a long time. Nobody believes in Mr. Marx anymore. We found out it didn't work. But right now, there's another one called More Money Today, MMT. Give me some money, more money, free money. Well, everybody loves it. So many people are starting to try it. Nobody's saying it out loud, but the British are doing it. Some people, Japanese are doing it. So we're going to find easy ways. Politicians always find easy ways. Will it work in the long term? As I said, David, being a young person in America right now is not a good thing to be.
Let's just go back one question here. You were talking about the next time a major economic collapse could happen. This year we saw COVID being the trigger. Now obviously nobody predicted COVID. It's a black swan event. The next time this could happen, the next time our debt bubble gets popped, Jim, what could be the trigger? Is it war? Is it anything else that you've been looking at?
Well, it's usually something we're not looking at. It's usually some small company or small country that gets into trouble and then things start snowballing. Even if you go back a few months, December and January, markets in some parts of the world were already starting to have problems. And then along came the virus and popped the bubble. It usually works that well. We don't have a worldwide epidemic. Well, actually, I take that back. We have had worldwide epidemics before, but never before have politicians reacted the wrong way. In 2009, David, we had the H1N1 virus in America. Well, they didn't close McDonald's. They didn't close the airports. This time, for whatever reason, politicians and academics and journalists seem to have overreacted and said we have to close the whole world. We've had many epidemics. Never before have we closed the whole world. So in my view, they made mistakes, and that's what has made this so horrible. But we had a lot of debt as well. And so now we have more debt. And next time around, that huge debt is going to leave us all with worse problems.
A lot of people draw similarities between today's situation and 2009. One of the major differences that you might have observed is that we've had no major financial institutions collapse. Why do you think this is?
David, the printing presses are running at unbelievable speed. Every day, the Bank of Japan goes to work and cranks up the printing presses